This video will show you how to replace the power steering rack bellows boot on a Mazda 3. This is part of your front steering and suspension located behind your front wheel. A quick note about doing this job: once it's complete, you're going to want to get yourself a 4-wheel alignment. Let's get into it. Okay friend, let's get started on our job. The first thing we have to do is safely raise and support the front of the vehicle so the wheel's off the ground. Once you've completed that, you're going to remove all 5 of your 21mm lug nuts and the wheel. Now that we have the wheel off, let's look along the rear side of the brakes here. This is where we can see our outer tie rod end, the inner tie rod end, and our jam nut in between. We're using a 21mm for the jam nut and a 19mm to hold that tie rod end. Turn the jam nut clockwise from this position. That's going to turn it up the inner tie rod end, breaking it free from the outer. Now that we have that broken free, let's move to the outer tie rod end mounting nut next. Now to dislodge this, you're going to find that you have a locking cotter pin. These come in all different shapes and sizes. Just go ahead and use some pliers or cutters, remove it. Once you have that out of there, just a quick inspection. If it looks like it's reusable, set it aside. Otherwise, dispose of it and replace it. We'll use a 17mm to loosen our mounting nut. Once it's off, just a quick inspection, and then we're going to start it back on a couple threads. We'll use some penetrant in this area. Continuing on, we need to separate the tie rod end from the knuckle. We don't want to cause any damage. I'm just going to carefully use my hammer, cause some vibration. The tie rod should drop down. The nut will prevent it from falling and potentially hurting anybody. Now we can start unscrewing the outer tie rod end from the inner tie rod end. As we start turning this counterclockwise, count the amount of turns, so during the installation, we can reinstall it the same. 1, 2, and so on. Now I got 25, your results may vary. A quick inspection and we'll set this aside. Now the next thing we need to do is take a 12mm wrench or some pliers. We're going to hold onto the shaft of the inner tie rod end and use our 21mm to remove the jam nut from the inner tie rod end. Just a quick inspection of that. Now we're paying attention in this area here. We can see our bellows boot. We're going to start dislodging that from the inner tie rod end first, and then from the power steering rack as well. As far as the outer clamp, you should be able to squeeze on the locking ears with some long nose pliers. Go ahead and remove that clamp. If it looks like it's rotted and weak, you can go ahead and replace it with a wire tie if necessary. Now continuing on, I've lubricated a pick with a little bit of grease. I'm going to make my way in between the bellow boot and the inner tie rod end, carefully breaking this free and lubricating it at the same time. Now that I have that broken free, let's follow that bellow boot all the way in towards the power steering rack. Here's where you're going to find your next clamp. For this one, it's a single time use, so I'm using a long pry bar directly up against the small ear of the clamp that I can see. I'm going to tap on the far end of my bar with a hammer and we'll break this free. Just a couple tries here. We don't want to cause any damage to anything, an exception of just that one clamp. We'll dispose of that properly. Take hold of that power steering rack bellows boot. We're going to give it a slight twist and pull it out and away. There it is, friend. Now let's prepare to install our brand new power steering rack bellows boot. Now when we go to install this bellows boot, we're going to take the far end and slide it over the power steering rack. You're going to have to work it around, but it does need to be sealed properly. Of course, we will clamp it into position once it's on there. Just slide that bellows boot up there as far as we need to. Let's start making our adjustments on that power steering rack next. Okay, so I feel like I have it on the power steering rack properly. Of course, you could use a mirror if necessary. I mentioned you want to clamp it down. For this, I'm just using a wire tie. We'll put it around, snug it up, and of course, trim off any excess. This is going to be easiest to install if you start it in place. We're making a small loop here, but it needs to be big enough we can make our way over the bellows boot. We'll get it all the way in position, snug it up. Make sure that does not fall off. Now it's time for the outer clamp next. Prior to bringing that bellows boot into position, let's apply a thin amount of lubricant along this area. You can use pretty much any type of grease that won't cause any damage to rubber. Now on this application, I just have to slide the boot into the proper position. I can see where my groove is, and we'll get the clamp in place. Since my clamp was reusable, that's what I'm going to be using on this. We'll make sure it's set in place perfectly. And then double check that boot. It shouldn't be twisted or kinked in any way. This looks great. Continuing on, we have some anti-seize. We're going to be using this on the threaded portion of the inner tie rod end. We need to make our way along the areas that the outer tie rod end and the jam nut will sit. With the anti-seize on there, it's time for our jam nut. We'll get this started on. We're going to bring it up approximately 3/4 of the way. Now we can install our outer tie rod end. Now, as far as the outer tie rod end is concerned, we're going to take this and start turning it on the same amount of turns it took to remove it in the first place. 1, 2, and so on. We're going to attach the tie rod end to the steering knuckle next. We'll just turn this as necessary. We should be able to slide the tie rod stud up and through. Continue on with your mounting nut. Now we'll tighten that mounting nut and torque it to 43 foot-pounds. Now that I have this torqued, I'm going to make an important note. We've replaced the outer tie rod end. The new tie rod end does not have a port for the cotter pin. If you're reusing your original outer tie rod end, you want to make sure you reinstall a brand new cotter pin. Now we're looking at the jam nut here. Let's go ahead and turn this so it bottoms out against the tie rod end. Now we're going to hold onto our tie rod end shaft while we turn this, snugging it tighter against the tie rod end, locking everything together. Make sure that's nice and tight. Now one last quick inspection in this area and we can reinstall our wheel. Once you have your wheel in place, start on all 5 of your 21mm lug nuts. Bottom them out, we'll get the wheel safely on the ground and torque each of them to 100 foot-pounds. Now we have the wheel safely on the ground, we're going to be torquing these in a crisscross manner to that 100 foot-pounds. Torqued. Okay friend, we finished our installation. The next thing you want to do is take your vehicle for a road test, listen for odd noises, and get yourself a 4-wheel alignment. Thanks for watching.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.